Many Nigerians immigrate to the United States, and the population has rapidly increased over the past few decades. Based on the most recent statistics by the US Census Bureau, over 450 Nigerian immigrants reside in the US as of 2022. While several studies have shown an association between the migration of Africans to the United States and weight gain, the rate of overweight and obesity among this group is much lower than the corresponding rate among Black, Hispanic, and the white Americans. However, despite the increasing presence of Nigerian immigrants in the US and the goal of achieving health equity by 2030, it is necessary to understand how acculturation and lifestyle factors impact the weight status of this group. So, my study examined the relationships between health behaviors and demographic factors among Nigerian immigrants in the United States. Employing a cross-sectional survey, I recruited 70 participants from local churches, student organizations, and local clubs. I assessed BMI on-site using a BIA scale, measured body fat percentage, assessed physical activity participation using a survey in the last 7 days, and I measured dietary intake and sleep duration using a 3-day recall method. The findings of my study indicated the prevalence of overweight and obesity to be 32% and 28% respectively, further supporting the fact that the rate of overweight and obesity among this group is much lower than the ones observed across other US populations. The results further revealed that there was no significant association between demographic factors such as age, sex, and length of stay and percent body fat. Additionally, health behaviors including physical activity levels, dietary intake, and sleep duration showed no significant association with percent body fat. Still, I found that females are more likely to be overweight or obese, are twice as likely to be overweight or obese compared to males, and individuals with low levels of physical activity are 6 times more likely to be overweight or obese compared to those who are moderately or highly active. My research is important for 2 reasons. First, it is the first original study showing the relationships between health behaviors and weight status among Nigerian immigrants in the US. Secondly, it sheds more light on the rate of overweight and obesity among Nigerian immigrants in the US and the associated factors that impact these conditions. Consequently, my research would enable public health researchers to implement and design lifestyle interventions that could prevent obesity and obesity-related conditions among individuals in this group. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm excited to share research examining the effects of a gymnastics intervention for children and adolescents with intellectual disabilities, specifically looking at how it affects their gross motor, fine motor, and balance skills. The central research question addresses whether gymnastics will be effective in this population. Based on existing research, examining that gymnastics intervention has been able to improve motor proficiency, the hypothesis of this study proposes that after participating in a gymnastics program, children with intellectual disabilities will show improved motor skills as assessed by the BOT2 motor proficiency assessment. A key feature of this study is understanding if these improvements are sustained after a washout period. Before I dive into the design of this study, it is important to note that children and adolescents with intellectual disabilities often face motor development delays compared to their typically developing peers. Intellectual disabilities encompass a broad range of conditions including autism spectrum disorder and Down syndrome, all of which can significantly impact motor skills. These delays can create challenges in daily life as well as social integration, which in social integration, which can be challenging throughout their daily life. Currently, there are several interventions looking at ways to improve motor skills among these individuals, including adaptive physical education, which is a program that gives individualized physical activity programs tailored to each individual's needs. Physical therapy and occupational therapy are also used to help improve these motor skills. However, these interventions, while effective, they may not encompass the entirety of the engagement and fun that a sport like gymnastics can offer, which is why we are looking at gymnastics as an intervention for these individuals. The study itself follows a waitlist crossover design. Initially, the groups will be randomly assigned into two groups, with group 1 receiving the intervention and group 2 not receiving the intervention. After a break or a washout period, the groups will switch, and group 2 will receive the intervention while group 1 serves as a control. This way we can compare the two groups within and between them and look at the results. Ultimately, this study seeks to fill the gap in the research that may not already be available, especially the long-term effects of a gymnastics intervention, which is why we want to see improved motor skills from a gymnastics intervention. Thank you.
Spring break 2020, college students across the country packed their bags, excited for a few days of rest and relaxation. Then, in the middle of their plans, the news alert started. A virus had broken out. Then, at first it was distant, something happening elsewhere. Then came the campus emails. Due to a global emergency, students are asked to stay home for 2 weeks. 2 weeks turned into indefinitely. Now imagine you're a college student, forced to return home, not to a place of safety, but to a place of instability, isolation, and emotional harm. One of the students in my study put it this way: I wasn't someone who felt safe at home. Not physical harm, just emotional harm all the time. During COVID, I did everything I could to avoid going home. I stayed locked in my room, and school became my escape. But that only added to my anxiety worse. I didn't know where to turn. I didn't feel supported, not by my school and not by my community, and I wasn't alone. This is not just one story. This is the story of countless emerging adults navigating the pandemic without the support, resources that they desperately needed. I am Autumn Ray Henry, a social work master's student, and my research focuses on emerging adult perceptions of mental health in post-COVID, examining the effects of the pandemic and how the emerging adults experienced it, the mental health struggles they faced, the supports they received or lack thereof that shaped their well-being. I conducted a mixed method study with 2 focus groups here at TCU, with emerging adults experiencing their lived experiences, and quantitative surveys with PHQ-9 and COVID stress skills, examining the mental health trends and the supports they received. 17 18 to 25-year-old TCU students participated in the study. 81% were female, and close to 15% identified as Hispanic. What did we learn? We learned that many students felt unseen and unsupported by their school. Others turned to unhealthy coping, such as alcohol, isolation, and social media. And some experienced unstable home environments without the access to safe spaces. Yet, among the struggles, there were protective factors: peer connections, movement and exercise, faith, and resiliency that buffer the effects for some. Emerging adulthood is a time of exploration, transition, growth, but yet for some, it's also a time of instability, emotional struggle, and uncertainty. Our survey findings identified that 50% of participants had trouble eating nearly every day for several days, and 75% experienced a decline in school grades. The effects of COVID-19 are still being carried by emerging adults today. We can't afford to ignore it. When you see a friend, a peer, or a stranger, ask them how they're doing. When they say I'm fine, ask again, because the opposite of isolation is connection. We must continue to research, to listen, to build safe spaces, and make mental health a priority. The question is, will we?
Okay, good morning, Fort Worth, Texas. I know it's not the morning, but that's my line, so I'm going to stick to it. My name is Parker Hughes, and as a future human performance coach, the only thing I care about is making athletes better, and in the case of swimming, making them faster. So, what brings a swimmer from this guy at the end of the pool struggling to breathe to an Olympic champion like Caleb Dressel? That's what this study is looking to figure out. Swimming is about 2 or 3 decades behind research pertaining to track and field, cycling, running, everything like that, mostly because waterproofing equipment is very difficult. I'll have a funny story for that later if you want to know. So, this study is looking to quantify the propulsive forces of swimming across all 4 strokes: butterfly, backstroke, breaststroke, and freestyle, as well as quantify what the kicking and pulling forces and components are within each of these 4 strokes. Research in this area has actually never been done before. There's one very low-level study that looked at freestyle of the pulling and kicking components, but this study was not very well received. So this study is pretty much the pilot study in the entire field. The main goal of this study is to quantify what these force components are and to put a unique signature and thumbprint on the 4 strokes to understand what the differences are and how each stroke needs to be better trained by performance coaches such as myself. Another hypothesis within this study is females are going to have higher proportional leg drives compared to men, because it's already well established that women have proportionally stronger lower bodies compared to men, but this has not been studied or proven, even though we don't use that word, for swimming and diving. So the main goals of this study is to figure out how do we get swimmers from mediocre people struggling like this to Olympic champions, and figuring out the components within each stroke is how we do that. We are going to take force component data from universities like TCU, Arizona State, University of Arizona, BYU, Utah, Texas A&M, and hopefully our friends up at SMU. We'll see if they agree to join us. And we're getting this data from strain gauges mounted to the end of the pool, hopefully without getting wet. So hopefully research and data collection will start in April, and by this time next year we will have changed the game of swimming performance. Thank you.
I imagine a race between LeBron James and Simone Biles. Okay, what comes to mind as soon as you see that? You can think like Simone Biles is gonna take a jump start at the beginning, okay? But LeBron James kind of will catch up. Why is that? Do you think he's gonna catch up because he's just tall? Well, if we take that same logic, then shouldn't be all the world's fastest runners be tall, right? Well, at Locomotor Performance Lab, we don't guess, we test. So we tested world's fastest runners, and we found out that they're different in size. They come between 5 feet 5 inches to 6 feet 5 inches. So that's a big size difference, right? Why is there a difference? Well, what we did was we questioned, what if we make Simone Biles the same height as LeBron James? Now we're not making Honey I Blew Up the Kids, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna use an equally scientific method, which is called a fruit number. So what's a fruit number? What fruit number does is tells us how fast somebody is for their size. So for example, if we resize Simone Biles to LeBron's height, we can kind of figure out whose gait is more faster, okay? So you understand that. So if tall people have equal fruit numbers, so same fruit numbers as short people, that means they're only running fast because they're tall, okay? So we tested this. We tested 37 elite sprinters on a special treadmill and or over ground with high-speed cameras. And they 23 miles per hour to 27 miles per hour, that's pretty fast, okay? So what did we find? Drum rolls, please. We found that the fruit numbers were similar. So what does that mean? Like I said, if the fruit numbers are similar, that means tall sprinters are running faster only because of their height. So tall sprinters are running faster than short sprinters, okay? Second thing, since the fruit numbers are similar, that means the gaits are also similar. So that means taller people are just the scaled up version of short people. So if you have kids, adults are just scaled up version of kids, okay? So something like that. So LeBron James could be just a scaled up version of Simone Biles. So now we have to shrink Simone back to her original size and ask the question again, who's gonna win? Well, we don't know yet. We just solved one piece of the puzzle because we found out at top speed, LeBron's gonna be fast, but we don't know if we race them, who's gonna be faster. So stay tuned with Locomotor Performance Lab. since we solve more puzzles with this. Thank you.
I want you to think about all the time you'll spend sitting today. You wake up, drive to work, sit at a desk, then drive home. After a long day, you'll probably cozy up on the couch to watch TV or play some video games to relax. Now, I want you to add up all that time together. I'll give you a second. Got that number? Have you ever heard the phrase, sitting is the new smoking? Research shows that prolonged sedentary behavior increases the risk of developing chronic health conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and even all-cause mortality. One activity I mentioned, video games, is one of today's most popular media among children and adults alike. Despite their popularity, one glaring issue is how sedentary gaming can actually be. Between work, transportation, and leisure sitting time, adult video game players are likely at higher risk for developing chronic health conditions or even early death. Okay, I know that's so negative, but here's the good news. Physical activity, particularly that done during your free time, can actually lower these risks, which is super great news. So to prevent and mitigate the risks in adult video game players, I've explored the relationship between gameplay and exercise behaviors in this population. On average, I found adult video games players spend 51 hours per week sedentary, with 27 stemming from gaming. In contrast, this group only spent 2 hours per week engaged in exercise during their free time. I know, right? That's a huge, staggering imbalance. But that's not all. The data shows a clear negative trend between these two variables. The longer our participants played video games during the week, the less they exercised. In fact, those who played the least amount of video games during the week were 2.5 times more likely to exercise during their free time than those who played the most. But another surprising finding is that esports athletes are actually 2.5 times more likely than casual players to engage in exercise during their free time, which people often believe quite the opposite. Since that's their job, they're going to play more, but that's not the case. Why? It's more likely because their esports coaches are requiring their participants to participate in fitness training, whereas casual players have no such requirement. Clearly, there is a relationship between gameplay and physical activity, or rather a lack of it. But video games are not the problem, rather finding a balance between these two variables. My goal is to help gamers to game on while simultaneously improving their physical health. Through my research, I'll be able to build better sedentary behavior guidelines and interventions targeting this population. So what can we do? Let's stay active, stay focused, and promote health in this growing community. Thank you.
Okay, show of hands. Who here is getting hungry? Me too. By now, many of us are thinking about our next meal, and we'll eat it without a second thought. But for upwards of 1 in 3 older adults with dysphagia, swallowing and eating is really complicated. Oftentimes, it's dangerous. Dysphagia, or difficulty swallowing, occurs in many patient populations that a lot of you see, from dementia to people who have experienced strokes. And believe it or not, speech-language pathologists are tasked as well with specializing in swallowing therapy for these patients. One way we do that is through tongue-strengthening exercise, since the tongue plays a key role in swallowing. The tongue is involved in pushing food down and protecting you from it entering the airway. And so we use tongue-strengthening exercise to improve overall swallow function. How are we doing this in the field? We actually don't know, guys, and that's the reason for my study. So I surveyed 126 SLPs that are working with older adults right now, and I asked them exactly that. What are you doing with tongue-strengthening exercise? The results are all over the place, actually. So if we look up here at determinants of dose, things that make up a prescription for exercise, we see the intensity or exercise effort, repetitions or exercise count, the frequency with which we're doing exercises across a certain period of time or length of program. All of those things have no consensus among SLPs right now in the field. We also see that they're using a variety of tools, some of which are more low-tech or inexpensive, like tongue depressors. Others are more expensive and used in different settings, and they're hard to access. One thing that I found from my survey that was super interesting, some people don't have access to either of these, and they're resorting to using peanut butter and spoons with their patients. This is a big deal, and it calls to attention a lack of standardization in healthcare and especially in our field. but it's not an SLP's fault. We found that they face a lot of difficulty with certain things, such as a lack of research-based guidelines and protocols to dosage, a lack of clinical access to funding and access to these tools. And finally, they deal with patient motivation and fatigue, all of which force them to rely on their clinical judgments. Again, this gets at a lack of standardization in healthcare and in our field. And bottom line, what I want this work to show is that everyone deserves to eat safely, and we need to work to make sure that clinicians feel confident providing therapy to those with dysphagia. Thank you.
So labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, or exploitation of individuals for labor. This, which through force and coercion, which leads to debt bondage or involuntary solitude. A lot of people can imagine that someone who's being trafficked is walking down the street and someone is going to jump out of the bushes and abduct them. While this is definitely not the case. A lot of times, those who are being trafficked by someone that they trust, like an intimate partner, and it may be happening in their home. So with this knowledge, a study was done by the Human Trafficking Hotline and the Polaris Project in 2021, and they shared that the top 3 access points for human trafficking, specifically labor trafficking survivors, were 1, family, friends, 2, social service providers, and 3, law enforcement officers. So these access points are people that labor trafficking victims come in contact with when they are experiencing exploitation. And so when your loved one or the one who you trust the most, your partner, is your perpetrator as well, social service providers are crucial in providing help and providing care for those and refuge for those who are experiencing labor trafficking. And so therefore, the purpose of this study was to uncover the perceptions of labor trafficking among IPV survivors in intimate partner violence settings, so their shelters or any of their organizations. So a qualitative content analysis a qualitative focus group study was done among 32 intimate partner violence service providers at 4 different organizations. A content analysis and thematic analysis was done to assess their perceptions. However, the full data analysis is not complete yet. Preliminary findings, though, shared that there is disparities in terms of service providers and their readiness to provide services for this population. One organization rated themselves as a 0, and then one organization also rated themselves as an 8, which I found really interesting. Also, one of the biggest takeaways from this focus group study was that service providers expressed a need for more legal resources and highlighted cultural barriers. A lot of people within this population are not native to the United States, and therefore they are isolated by their partners. And with this ideology, many individuals being trafficked by their partners may not realize they're being trafficked because of these cultural, they are forced to be submissive, and there's just cultural understandings of that. Therefore, all service providers have expressed that they need to look into the cultural context of this intersection, as many victims are threatened with deportation, and there's threats against their immigration status. Ultimately, labor trafficking within intimate partner violence goes unnoticed, mistaken for domestic abuse alone. By identifying knowledge gaps among service providers, interventions can be tailored to better support this vulnerable population and ensure that appropriate care is being provided during times of crises. Thank you.